Coming up on One Detroit, head to North Corktown for a community meeting. They're talking neighborhood identity, housing, and concerns about development. Plus, I catch up with Nolan and Stephen for a look at the week's headlines, and then a closer look at PFAS, contaminants in our water system, what we should be looking for, and what the state is doing about it. It's a Great Lakes Now special report. I'm Christy McDonald. Join me at the Detroit Institute of Arts. One Detroit is coming up.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
I have a question. Who wants to go first? To win? Who wants to grow our business? Who wants to make more money? Who wants more job opportunities? If you want Michigan to compete and become a top 10 state, raise your hand. Together, we've turned Michigan around and started moving forward. Now help us build a stronger Michigan than ever. Raise your hand at strongermichigan.com.
Support also provided by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and the Bill and Shirlee Fox Fund for Leadership and Public Affairs Programming at Detroit Public TV.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. We are at the Detroit Institute of Arts. A beautiful day to enjoy it. I always get inspiration here. We have a lot coming up for you on the show this week. We are taking you into North Corktown for a community conversation about neighborhood identity and development. Hear what people are most concerned about. Plus, we have an in-depth report on PFAS in our drinking water. You'll see what they're doing to raise public awareness to PFAS in the Huron River. It's a special report from Great Lakes Now. And we catch up with Nolan and Stephen for a look at the week's headlines. That is all coming up on One Detroit. But we're starting off with a community conversation in North Corktown. It's the neighborhood just north of I-75 and has some different challenges. And our meeting there is part of Detroit Public TV's commitment to going into different communities and listening to the concerns that people have. So we partnered again with Community Development Advocates of Detroit, or CDAD, and headed to Nancy Whiskey Pub for a pretty lively discussion.
We figured, everybody knows where Corktown is. It's that place where they got those really nice little historic houses, Corktown and North Corktown have really different needs.
North Corktown, north of I-75, a lot of urban prairie, so many homes and businesses long gone, but residents here are seeing changes in their neighborhood. They're not far from downtown and so close to the hot Corktown real estate market and Ford's train station renovation. One Detroit and Community Development Advocates of Detroit got together with North Corktown residents at Nancy Whiskey, the neighborhood's only tavern.
Here today, we are going to be just having a free-flowing conversation about the state of the neighborhood here in North Corktown, the perspective of residents or stakeholders. How have you seen the neighborhood change or stay the same in your time here?
I noticed in 2008 that young people like you were pouring in when the rest of the country was suffering from the financial crisis, and that was very interesting to me. It was a good thing.
A lot of things happened in my 58 years. It was nice when I was a kid because it was all filled up with all kind of different types of architecture. Everything was here, and then it went away.
The difference between the blight nowadays, because the developers have an interest in, is market value. You could probably purchase a home for maybe like $250,000, you know, sell your home for $250,000. Whereas when I was growing up in, you know, the 80s and the 90s, you know, you couldn't even give it away, you know.
When I got here, I bought a house and had to do a bunch of fixing up. I mean, Big Bob did it for me. But when he did the work, I said, "Did you get a building permit?" He said, "Oh no, we don't do that." Well, that was 10 years ago. Well, you know what? You got to get a building permit now.
What I've noticed since I've been there is right across the street, I think there's plans to build a house. I also think my landlord wants to build another house right next to where I'm at. So I'm very aware that like things are changing quickly.
Most of us are homeowners, and as a homeowner, that's a good thing because the property value has gone up, but you also have to consider the taxes.
I don't know if it's the elephant in the room or like the shadow from the train station. There's definitely a microscope on Corktown, and I'm sure North Corktown as well.
We already started making change before Ford came on. We were already on our way, and Ford just blessed us with a little more. The only thing I've noticed more of is notes on my door, do I want to sell my home?
We need to control development as a community and really guide the city's process and demand what we want to see here. And one of those critical components is the open space. And that's one of the reasons I ended up here, because growing up in suburban monoculture out in the exurbs, I had a lot of open space as a child. That's the thing that is one of the precious jewels of the neighborhood.
I hope that North Corktown becomes an example for urban redevelopment throughout the country. And when I say urban redevelopment, it's totally different from gentrification, where people move in and change the entire neighborhood. Urban redevelopment that I'm referring to is you develop the neighborhood around the neighbors that are there, and everyone else will come.
There is a lot happening in this part of the city, and you can understand people's concerns. So let's bring in Nolan Finley from the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson from WDET Radio to take a look at this, plus some of the week's headlines. Hey guys, how are you?
Good, good.
It's good to see you. You know, I was at this meeting in North Corktown, and people were really passionate. But you're hearing a lot of the same things as other meetings that we've been to in the city: and neighborhood identity, concerns about development. One thing that was really interesting that people brought up: they're very excited at the prospect of Ford coming into the old train station.
Yeah, no, they should be there because Ford is making such a big investment and will cast such a big shadow. That investment will cast such a big shadow that there will be benefits in that neighborhood for sure, right? The real question is, how far does Ford not go, right? Where does that kind of end? At the same time, you know, change is scary when you live someplace, when you're invested in it, and when new people come in and kind of decide that they should have as much say about things as you do. We're not great here in Detroit at respecting that and giving people the voice they should in their communities to be able to protect against that kind of thing.
And it's that kind of listening and making sure that people have at least some say.
Change also brings opportunity, brings economic activity, and you know, it's fine to say, well, the new folks coming in shouldn't have as much say, of course they should. I mean, they're coming in, they're bringing their dollars, bringing their energy. This city is transforming. There's no reason people have to be left behind, but there's also no reason folks who are coming in should have their voices shut out or not heard.
But I think what people are also talking about is when you're talking about development and you're talking about housing, you're making sure that there's housing that's still available for all kinds of income levels.
Yeah, and let's be clear, there's no city that's great at that, right? Every city that's gone through this has seen poor people pushed out, and what that means in most of those cities is that Black people and Latinos get pushed out. I think we have an opportunity to do better here, and because this is such an overwhelmingly majority city, we have an obligation to try to do that, to make sure that people who have stayed with the city through all of the craziness that has gone on here and have not left, that's its own kind of investment that deserves to be recognized. Money is not the only thing that's valuable when you're talking about community change, and you have to have somebody in these places to make that argument, to have that voice, Too often in these neighborhoods, the people who live there are not organized enough to have that voice for themselves. So it's really up to the city to figure out other ways to get that voice heard.
And they were pretty organized, though, at this table.
You know, there's a lot of room in Corktown. There's a lot of vacant land. There's a lot of room for everybody. And throughout the city, there's far more affordable housing than there is upper income housing. The housing that's going to fatten your tax coffers. You've got to have more economic diversity in the city, and we don't have that now.
You do, but the tension is that if you create that in places where people right now have affordable housing, the fear is that it pushes them out, that the taxes get pushed up beyond what they can pay, that the neighborhood changes in a way that they don't feel welcome. You got the city is the organization, the institution that is supposed to mitigate those things. We have done a bad job of it in the past. The Duggan administration, I think, is a little more focused on it than some of the past administrations, but we can always do better. The affordable housing that's available in the city, by the way, most of it is substandard, and that's another problem, right? You have people renting places that are not up to code. You have people living in houses that they can't afford to keep up anymore. I think one of the things that we want to look at is how can all this new investment help those people live better in the neighborhoods where they have stayed.
Well, there should be jobs created at all levels. It's not just Ford coming in. There'll be a lot of other businesses coming in. There'll be a lot of economic opportunity. It's not like some other places where or other cities where they're bulldozing neighborhoods. You don't have to bulldoze anything in Corktown because a lot of it's been bulldozed already. There's just a lot of space and a lot of opportunity there, and there's no reason why you have to be fearful that it's a zero-sum game. I mean,
not
it's
fearful,
a big pie.
but I think moving carefully. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other headlines that have been percolating. Of course, the Mueller report out. I don't think anyone still knows quite what to make of it. People want the entire report released, including Michigan's Attorney General, who filed with 17 other attorneys general to make that public. I sat down with her actually hours before that report was released, and I'll have that interview coming up in the next couple of weeks. But really interesting that the push-pull for wanting to see all of the information.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're entitled to see a fair amount of the information. I am also sensitive, though, to the idea that this is grand jury testimony. Right. And when you go through the exercise of a grand jury and don't end up with indictments as a result, you don't get to see that testimony in other cases. Now, this is a little different, right? There were lots of people who were charged and indicted out of all of this investigation, 37 people. So we do deserve, as the public who paid for this, to know what Robert Mueller found and what he didn't find. There should be, a pretty dutiful process to make sure that there's not information out there that damages people who are innocent, or
and that's the key.
Or that discourages
because that's a high
people,
risk.
or that discourages people from going into the grand jury and telling the truth. Right. That's the real fear here, is that you expose people who gave testimony. Maybe in the future people are more reluctant, but the idea that we should settle for this summary from William Barr, which is not any sort of summary at all, is absurd.
You get the last word on this, Nolan.
Those who are not satisfied with the summary are not going to be satisfied when the full report is released, because, as Steve said, you can't release a full report. You're going to have to hold back by law the grand jury testimony. You'd have to change the law to release that. And I want the report released as much as possible. But I think if the summary were not an accurate depiction of what was in that report, Robert Mueller and some of his team would have said so by now. I think you've got what you're going to get out of this, and what you got is no collusion and an indeterminate evidence on obstruction of justice, and I don't know what else they're going to do with this.
All right, we're going to have to watch that in the last couple of seconds that we have. You guys celebrated, you chased out Le Nain Rouge over the weekend, right?
10th time.
It's always great and silly
He
to see you guys.
He almost got us this time.
It was a good turnout of people, though, eh?
And the question is, are we too old for this?
Yes, I'm going to
No
answer that
such
quickly
thing.
and emphatically.
No such thing.
Absolutely.
Of course we are.
Okay. All right, thanks, guys. Turning now to contaminants that threaten our water supply. They're called PFAS. They are a group of man-made chemicals that come from a variety of sources, anything from Teflon to firefighting foam to paper mills. And while manufacturers have phased out using PFAS, they're called forever chemicals because they stick around in your body for years. According to a report from the state, out of 1,114 public water systems in Michigan, 119 of them have been found to contain some level of PFAS. Detroit Public Television and its Great Lakes Now Bureau, in partnership with MLive, is taking a closer look at PFAS in Michigan in a new half-hour special. One of the areas getting a lot of attention is the Huron River. Reporter Sandra Svoboda has more.
Ann Arbor, the city of victors, on the gridiron and in the water glass.
We've won the state contest 3 different years, and we have a pretty good string of winning the regional area taste-off the past several years.
Brian Steglitz runs the city's water treatment plant, serving some 125,000 residents.
So the Huron River is the primary water supply for the city of Ann Arbor. It accounts for about 85% of our water supply, and we're a 50 million gallon per day water treatment plant. Impacting the Huron River is a big issue for us because that's really where we get the majority of our drinking water.
We drink the Huron River. I'm sitting in Ann Arbor and I just made coffee from water in the Huron River. That's a problem.
A problem reported last year by MLive's Paula Gardner after she heard there might be PFAS in the water. PFAS, actually a family of chemicals, have been linked to health problems.
Liver toxicity, thyroid disease, increased cholesterol, adverse pregnancy outcomes, all the way to some interesting studies looking at effectiveness of vaccines being reduced.
The University of Michigan's John Meeker has learned what he can about the PFAS used in firefighting foam, Teflon, and Scotchgard water repellent. They're called forever chemicals because they don't break down and don't really go away.
Several years ago, nobody had heard of this group of chemicals, right? A lot of the information is protected as trade secrets. So they have this whole operation and formula for making this fabulous chemical or group of chemicals that have all these wonderful properties. They want to protect that.
The Huron River winds through southeastern Michigan, Oakland, Livingston, Washtenaw, Wayne, and Monroe counties, all the way to Lake Erie. The tip about PFAS was right. Gardner traced it to a factory in Wixom, upstream in Oakland County.
I requested some documents and we found out an auto supplier, part of a major company, was dumping PFAS just like the tip said. It was 28,000 parts per trillion of PFOS, which is extraordinarily high. And in turn, the wastewater treatment plant was sending, after dilution, at least 280 parts per trillion of PFAS into the Huron River.
A few hundred parts per trillion might seem low, but the maximum concentration that can legally be put into surface water is just 12 parts per trillion. Concerns over PFAS led to a do not eat the fish warning on the river.
Over a course of probably 3 weeks, that do not eat advisory extended toward Ann Arbor and then all the way into Lake Erie. So we've got 1,000 miles of watershed now where we can't eat the fish.
This is the do not eat fish consumption sign that's supposed to be over there.
Laura Rubin heads the Huron River Watershed Council. We're at Ann Arbor's Island Park, across from the U of M hospital.
These are the temporary signs that were put in last September when we got the first do not eat fish consumption advisory. This spring and summer, all of the partners should be putting in permanent signs.
Permanent? For how long? There's no word on that. Not yet.
Upriver in the chain of lakes in Oakland and Livingston County, there's a huge angling population that fishes and that also eats the fish. And in our urban areas, especially around the dams, but in these kinds of parks and down through Ypsilanti, we do see a lot of anglers that are taking the fish and using it to, feed their families.
At Island Park, birdwatchers lock cameras on some great horned owls, birds of prey that don't usually eat fish, but they might eat other animals that do.
There's some things we know about PFAS, and there's a lot more that we don't know, and we don't know how it is building up in the food chain, especially from the fish over time.
It's still safe for paddling sports, even swimming, because there's not been evidence that PFAS can be absorbed through the skin. But still, there's the drinking water. Brian Steglitz knew about PFAS before it came to town.
There are other places in the country where this was sort of rearing its head over the past several years. And really here in Michigan, it started with the Wolverine site on the west side of the state.
So you can see the Rogue River is, right alongside the trail.
Garrett Ellison is another MLive journalist reporting on PFAS. He's near the old Wolverine Tannery site north of Grand Rapids.
There's PFAS in the river here, and it's not solely coming from the groundwater at the tannery site. It's coming from Wolverine dump sites that are upriver.
Scotchgard's the source, used on shoe leather for decades. Residents nearby recently learned that their well water is laced with PFAS.
This is actually some of the most highest contamination levels in drinking water in the state and potentially in the country, maybe even the world.
In Ann Arbor, PFAS turned up at unusually high levels in foam on the Huron River, but the city draws its water below the surface. There are filters to remove PFAS to well below acceptable levels.
In our filters is granular activated carbon, so it's like small pieces of charcoal, and there's a lot of surface area on those pieces of charcoal where certain types of contaminants can stick. The PFAS sticks to that and is effectively removed from the water.
The PFAS problem will cost several hundreds of thousands of dollars each year because the carbon filters have to be changed more often.
It is surprising to me to realize that an entire 1,000-mile watershed can have this type of an effect from a single industrial polluter. And when you consider Southeast Michigan, how many do we have here?
The longer this lurks, the harder it is to clean up. This is going to continue to happen over and over again until we start looking at how we can regulate and prevent these chemicals from getting introduced in the first place.
Well, here with me is Sandra Svoboda. She's one of the producers on the documentary and also the program director of Great Lakes Now. It's so good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we just came out of this story looking at the Huron River, but people are going to say, all right, big picture, what's happening in the state of Michigan when it comes to PFAS?
Right, and it's not just the state of Michigan. This is an international story. We collected headlines, and it's in Europe, it's in Australia. But here in Michigan, kind of first broke in Svoboda, the old Wurtsmith Air Force Base up there, where they discovered groundwater contamination, probably from firefighting foam there. Okay. Residents upset about drinking water, property values, a military situation. And then the state started testing and finding other communities where it's in drinking water, and really where it's kind of happened in high concentration is in the Grand Rapids area.
Okay, so you spent a lot of time on the west side of the state in this documentary taking a look. So what can we expect?
Yeah, well, what we did was went and talked to people who have homes with contaminated water supplies. The MLive Media Group has been doing a lot of great reporting out there, and they actually partnered with us and collaborated on producing this series and all the work that's online at Great Lakes Now. So we went and we talked to people who have this in their homes. They invited us in. They told us what their lives are like to be ruled by contaminated water. And that is everything from thinking back on spouses that died of liver cancer a few years ago and toddlers who have some of the highest PFAS concentration in their blood. I mean, that's now a daily reality for people with these high levels of concentration of PFAS in their water.
So when you think about it, though, it's kind of like, all right, let's track it back to the source. And so were you able to talk to any companies or find the sourcing for any of this?
Yeah. So a lot of the sourcing is not necessarily pinpointed, but there are suspicions in some areas around the state of industrial sites that it came from. In the Grand Rapids area north of there's towns called Belmont and Rockford. And the Wolverine Tannery that was there is kind of pinpointed as the source of contamination. The Wolverine Worldwide has been installing filters in people's homes. They're meeting with the MDEQ. They tell us, we tried like heck to get them on camera, but we did get a fairly extensive statement from them, and so that's available at greatlakesnow.org.
Okay, so when people think about this, though, they think, well, should there be some kind of regulation from the state, or what is the state doing to try to track all the areas where there might be contamination and then start to deal with this?
Yeah, different levels of government have taken different responsibility. We visited the Plainfield Township Water Department. You can see where they installed the granular activated carbon filters because they had that high level. The state has, MDEQ is doing testing. They have a fairly extensive information page, and they're working on setting these levels. And then the federal government, the EPA has a standard of 70 parts per trillion. 70 parts per trillion. What that's equivalent to is 1 drop in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So these people who have the contaminations are sometimes seeing hundreds of times that in their water. And so there's a certain political dimension to where you set that level. That's happening at the federal level, and then states are following suit of having it declared hazardous at that point.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Sandra.
Yeah.
It's always good to see you. And of course, if you want to catch that documentary, just head to greatlakesnow.org. It will be streaming there for you. Our thanks to Stephen and Nolan for joining us, and also for the DIA for having us. I always love being here. You get great inspiration. That's going to do it for One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
I have a question. Who wants to go first? To win? Who wants to grow our business? Who wants to make more money? Who wants more job opportunities? If you want Michigan to compete and become a top 10 state, raise your hand. Together, we've turned Michigan around and started moving forward. Now help us build a stronger Michigan than ever. Raise your hand at strongermichigan.com.
Support also provided by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and the Bill and Shirlee Fox Fund for Leadership and Public Affairs Programming at Detroit Public TV.